In Ellison's heart, 3 corrupt cops, Ethan, Lucas, Ryan, rule with iron fists, framing the innocent untouchable. But when Darius Coleman, their old victim, becomes police chief, secrets unravel. Will justice prevail, or will their empire stand? Dive into this electrifying showdown now. Fulton County Courthouse, nestled in the heart of Ellison City, shimmered under May sunlight that day, but inside, the air was thick with arrogance. Ethan Marshall, 38, with his short-cropped blonde hair, leaned back in his chair, a smug half-smile playing on his lips. Beside him, Lucas Bennett, 35, his pale blue eyes darting around the room, tried to mask his anxiety beneath a veneer of jest. Ryan Caldwell, 42, a hulking figure with sinewy hands clasped tightly, let out a low chuckle whenever Ethan whispered something to him. The 3 police officers from the Ellison Central Police Department weren't here to face justice. They had come to savor their victory. To them, justice was merely a game they were certain to win. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, not from tension but from a perverse excitement. Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan were no strangers to the scene. The hateful glares from the public benches, the helpless whispers of attorneys. They were wolves in blue uniforms, wielding their authority like a divine right. For years, they had sown fear in Ellison's black community. Baseless arrests, unnecessary punches thrown in the shadows of narrow alleys, packets of drugs mysteriously appearing in victims' pockets, all covered up by falsified reports and quiet handshakes with those in power. Ethan, the ringleader, prided himself on his knack for manipulation. "No one can touch us," he had once boasted to Lucas over drinks at a bar on the corner of 5th Street, his voice dripping with conceit. Today, they sat there in crisp suits, awaiting the collapse of yet another case. A black man, accused of drug possession, had been arrested by them 6 months prior. Ryan vividly recalled the moment he tossed a bag of white powder into the man's trunk, the victim's panicked eyes as he realized he'd been framed. But now, the key witness had disappeared, the dashcam footage had gone missing, and Ethan knew Judge Harold Grayson, stern as he was, could do nothing without evidence. Lucas, always the most anxious of the trio, couldn't suppress a smile at the thought of soon leaving the courtroom, perhaps heading to their favorite bar to celebrate. Yet, deep within each of them, there lingered an unnamed void. They didn't fear the law, but somewhere in their core, they knew the crowd's vengeful stares were carving into their minds. A mother sat in the back row, her eyes red and swollen, clutching her hands as she glared at them. Ethan pretended not to notice, but his heart beat faster than usual. Ryan, though he acted indifferent, felt sweat bead on his forehead. Lucas, the most sensitive of the 3, glanced at his colleagues, wondering if this time they were truly as untouchable as they believed. That day, Fulton County Courthouse wasn't just a place of judgment. It was an arena of injustice, and these 3 men stood at its peak, unaware that the ground beneath them had begun to crack. The sharp rap of Judge Harold Grayson's gavel echoed through Fulton County Courthouse, shattering the stifling air. "The case is dismissed," he declared, his voice steady but tinged with a trace of bitterness. The moment the judge's words fell, Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell flashed triumphant smiles. Ethan shot Lucas a wink, as if they shared a secret the world could never grasp. Ryan, unable to contain himself, let out a booming laugh that drew glares from some in the crowd. "They really think they can take us down?" Ryan muttered, loud enough for the front row to hear. Lucas, ever the more cautious one, tried to maintain a serious expression, but the corners of his mouth twitched upward as Ethan clapped him on the shoulder, joking. "What are you worried about? We're Ellison's superheroes." The quip sent all 3 into peals of laughter, turning the courtroom into a stage for their arrogance. Over their 7 years at the Ellison Central Police Department, the trio had woven a tightly knit web of power. Ethan, with his silver tongue and cunning, always knew how to cozy up to those who mattered. A phone call to a city council member, a dinner with a high-ranking official, or a discreet envelope slipped into a hand. These were the tools that kept them untouchable. Lucas, though uneasy about these under-the-table dealings, played his part, often handling surveillance footage to ensure it was accidentally erased or corrupted. Ryan, with his volatile temper, took on the role of intimidating witnesses. A midnight phone call, a cold stare from the patrol car, or an unexpected visit. That was all it took to silence anyone bold enough to speak out. This time was no different. The black man they framed 6 months ago had chosen to back down, his face haunting Lucas in the rare moments when his conscience stirred. The sole witness, a 17-year-old boy from Ellison South Side, had trembled and refused to testify after Ryan showed up at his doorstep, saying nothing but standing there with a hand resting on his holstered gun. Physical evidence? Ethan had made sure the packet of drugs found in the victim's car was never tested for fingerprints. Every move they made was calculated, like a chess game where their opponent never stood a chance. The courtroom crowd, from reporters with notebooks filled with scribbles to ordinary citizens with weary eyes, could only witness the impotence of justice. An elderly woman in the back row clutched her handkerchief, silent tears streaming down her face. A young reporter with disheveled hair scribbled furiously, as if hoping her words could somehow change the outcome. But Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan didn't care. They prepared to leave the courthouse, their eyes gleaming with joy, like movie stars who just nailed a perfect scene. The rusty anchor bar was waiting, and tonight they would raise their glasses to another victory. Yet, amid their laughter, a cold breeze seemed to pass through, as if signaling that the stage was about to shift. As Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell stepped out of Fulton County Courthouse, their laughter echoed down the street, blending with the bustling rhythm of Ellison City. They had plans to celebrate at the Rusty Anchor, where cold beers and boastful stories awaited. Ethan, leading the way, recounted a time they taught a stubborn punk a lesson, making Ryan roar with laughter. Lucas, though uneasy, got swept up in the moment, daydreaming about his first sip of beer. But as they stepped outside, the courthouse loudspeaker crackled, calling everyone back for a special city announcement. Curious, the trio turned back, weaving to the gathering crowd. Inside, Judge Harold Grayson stood behind the bench, his expression stern. Today, he said, his voice low but sharp, the city of Ellison announces a turning point to restore justice, right here in this courthouse, where justice was just put to test. The crowd fell silent. The reporters stopped scribbling. Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan, lingering near the exit, shrugged, assuming this was mere formality. Please welcome the new chief of police, Grayson continued, Mr. Darius Coleman, who will lead reforms and restore trust in our community. The door swung open, and Darius Coleman, 45, strode in, his black suit tailored sharply, his piercing brown eyes scanning the room like a hawk. With a neatly trimmed beard and a faint but commanding smile, he embodied unyielding resolve. Ethan felt his blood run cold. Lucas's jaw dropped, his trembling hand gripping the door handle. Ryan, the most belligerent, clenched his fist, his face flushing red. Darius Coleman, a name that cut through their memories like a blade. 3 years ago, they had arrested Darius, then a community lawyer, on a fabricated charge of resisting arrest. Ethan had mocked him. Ryan had hurled vile threats, and Lucas had stood by in silent complicity. They held him for 48 hours, just to teach that black man his place. Now, he was the chief of the Ellison Central Police Department. As Darius stepped up to the podium, a court clerk accidentally dropped a small wooden box, the loud thud startling the crowd. But Darius, unflinched, picked up the box, placed it back on the table, and turned to the judge with a smile. "Looks like today is a day for surprises," he said, his voice warm but laced with meaning. The remark drew laughter from the courtroom, but for Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan, it rang like a death knell. They stood there, like 3 comedians who'd forgotten their lines, their panic eyes fixed on a man who was once their victim, now holding the power to shape their futures. The air in Fulton County Courthouse turned electric, as if poised for the start of a grand performance. The doors of Fulton County Courthouse closed behind Darius Coleman, but the echo of his entrance left Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell frozen in place. Darius's smile as he picked up the fallen wooden box was like a dramatic opening to a play in which the 3 officers hadn't expected to be the leads. The courtroom crowd began to murmur, some chuckling at the new police chief's composure. But for Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan, the atmosphere grew heavy, like the Ellison sky before a storm. They slipped out of the courthouse quietly, no longer mentioning the Rusty Anchor or cold beers. In their minds, only one name lingered: Darius Coleman. The next morning, the Ellison Central Police Department on Lincoln Avenue buzzed with unusual energy. Officers clustered in the hallways, whispering about the new boss. Ethan, in his crisp uniform, tried to maintain his usual confidence as he walked in, but his eyes lacked their typical arrogance. Lucas, ever anxious, wiped sweat from his brow, muttering, "You think he knows about the old stuff?" Ryan, shoulders tense, growled, "So what if he does? We're still who we are here." But when the meeting room door swung open and Darius Coleman stepped in, all three felt a chill race down their spines. Darius, 45, stood before the department in a pristine police uniform, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He didn't need to say much. His presence alone was a statement. "Colleagues," he began, his voice low but sharp as a blade, "I'm here not just to lead, but to change." The room fell silent, save for a stifled chuckle from a young officer who whispered to a colleague, "He looks like a superhero straight out of a movie." Darius overheard, smiled, and replied, "If I'm a superhero, then Ellison is a city that needs saving." The quip sparked laughter throughout the room, but for Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan, it was a direct blow to their smugness. Darius's arrival marked a turning point for the Ellison Central Police Department. He wasn't just a new leader. He was a symbol of the justice the city had lacked for too long. The words he spoke at that morning's meeting about accountability, transparency, and ending corruption weren't mere promises. They were a declaration of war. Ethan's throat went dry as Darius's gaze swept over him, as if piercing through the secrets he'd long buried. Lucas, seated in the corner, felt his heart pound, recalling Darius's eyes from 3 years ago when they locked him in a holding cell. Ryan, though he tried to act defiant, couldn't stop his hands from trembling slightly when Darius spoke of those who abuse power having no place here. As Darius concluded his speech, a clumsy officer knocked over a coffee mug on the table, sending the room into peals of laughter. Darius, unfazed, grabbed a cloth and wiped up the spill, quipping, "Looks like we need to reform coffee-holding skills, too." The laughter roared, but for the trio of officers, it was a sign that their stage had officially changed hands. The laughter in the meeting room of the Ellison Central Police Department hadn't yet faded after Darius Coleman's coffee spill joke, when the air turned grave. Darius, 45, stood tall, his sharp brown eyes sweeping over each officer, as if reading their thoughts. Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell, seated in the corner, felt their hearts pound harder. The smirk on Ethan's face had vanished, replaced by a rare tension. Lucas, hands slick with sweat, kept glancing at the door as if longing to flee. Ryan, though tried to maintain his defiance, couldn't stop his eyes from wavering as Darius approached the table, clutching a thick stack of files. "Marshall," Bennett, Caldwell, Darius called, his low voice reverberating, silencing the room. The three flinched, slowly rising and stepping forward to face him. Ethan forced a strained smile. "Sir, welcome to the department." Darius merely tilted his head, offering no reply, and instead set the files on the table with a dramatic thud. All eyes turned to the stack, curiosity mingling with anticipation. "This," Darius said, opening the folder, "is your history." Inside the files were pages long buried in the Ellison Central Police Department's archives, complaints of excessive force, records of wrongful arrests, and victim testimonies coerced into withdrawal. There was even an audio recording Ethan recognized instantly, a conversation between him and a city official, discussing how to handle a lawsuit. Lucas paled when he saw security camera stills, ones he thought he'd erased, capturing Ryan planting fake drugs in a black man's pocket on 12th Street. Darius pointed to each page, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "Abuse of power, racial bias, fabricated evidence. You've turned this uniform into a tool for crime." Ethan tried to speak. "Sir, this is just a misunderstanding." But Darius cut him off. "Misunderstandings don't last 7 years, Marshall." Lucas, near panic, stammered, "We were just following orders." Darius locked eyes with him, his gaze piercing. "Orders from whom? Greed or cowardice?" The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Ryan, his face flushed red, opened his mouth to protest, but Darius's stare silenced him. Closing the folder, Darius spoke clearly, each word deliberate. Starting today, there's nowhere left to hide. The entire Ellison Central Police Department felt it. A storm was coming, and the trio of officers stood at its epicenter. The air in the meeting room grew heavy, like the Ellison sky before a downpour, after Darius Coleman closed a folder brimming with evidence of Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell's crimes. A pen rolling across the floor startled Lucas, as if it were a harbinger of the collapse to come. Darius, 45, stood unwavering, his eyes fixed on the trembling trio before him. Ethan tried to hold on to his confidence, but his forced smile couldn't mask his panic. Lucas, his face ashen, stared at the floor, as if wishing he could sink into it. Ryan, though still clenching his fists, lacked his former bravado, now just a hollow shell of his once arrogant self. Darius, with a voice deep yet sharp as a blade, continued, "You've abused your power for far too long, but today it ends." He paused, letting his words sink into everyone in the room. Then, like a director setting the stage for a climactic scene, he declared, "Effective immediately, Marshall Bennett Caldwell, you are suspended from duty, pending an internal investigation." The room fell silent, stunned. A young officer, unable to hold back, blurted out, "Whoa, it's like a TV drama." The comment drew a few chuckles, breaking the tension, but for the trio, it was a thunderclap striking their hearts. Ethan felt his knees weaken. Lucas nearly collapsed into his chair, and Ryan just stood there, his gaze empty. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the room, just as Darius finished speaking. A whiteboard, loosely hung on the wall, had fallen, revealing an old photograph taped behind it. A picture of Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan in their uniforms, grinning triumphantly at a precinct party 5 years ago. The crowd gasped, some giggled, and one officer quipped, "Looks like even the wall wants to rat them out." Darius, unfazed, stepped forward, peeled the photo off, and looked directly at the trio, saying, "Your past has been exposed, and your future won't be easy." The statement, paired with the humorous coincidence of the falling board, left the room both shocked and amused, as if watching a perfectly staged performance. The suspension of Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan wasn't just a punishment. It was the end of the empire of power they had built within the Ellison Central Police Department. The looks from their colleagues, once filled with respect or fear, now carried contempt or relief. Ethan, who had manipulated everything, felt his world crumble as the badge on his chest became a burden. Lucas, heavy-hearted, recalled the times he stayed silent in the face of his teammates' crimes. Ryan, though trying to maintain his defiant facade, couldn't deny that the power he had abused had vanished like smoke. The hallways of the Ellison Central Police Department had never felt so suffocating for Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell. After being suspended by Darius Coleman, they left the meeting room under the scrutinizing eyes of their colleagues, their steps heavy as if dragging the ruins of their fallen empire. The old photo revealed by the fallen whiteboard, like an unexpected comedic twist, still had some officers whispering and chuckling behind them. But that joke was merely the prelude to a bigger storm approaching. The city of Ellison, under Darius's leadership, was ready to unearth every dark corner of the police department. Just 2 days later, a comprehensive internal investigation was launched, unprecedented in Ellison's history. Darius, 45 years old, didn't stop at promises of reform. He acted like a masterful director, ensuring every spotlight shone on the trio's dirty secrets. Investigators, handpicked by Darius, combed through every file, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and scoured every inch of the department's 2,000-square-foot archive. The result? A mountain of evidence exposing crimes Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan thought would remain buried forever. They uncovered falsified arrest reports, like the case of a black man handcuffed by Ryan on 9th Street for no reason other than looking suspicious. Illegal search reports surfaced with security camera footage showing Lucas leading a team to barge into an apartment in East Ellison without a warrant, just to intimidate a family. Most damning, investigators found traces of embezzlement. Over $10,000 from the evidence locker had disappeared under Ethan's hands, who once bragged about making a little extra during late-night drinks. Each discovery was a hammer blow to the trio, who had once prided themselves on being untouchable. One investigator, while inspecting the archive, accidentally dropped an old cassette tape box, which blared disco music from the 80s. The team burst into laughter, and someone joked, "Maybe this is a tape Ethan played to celebrate every time he got away with something." Darius, present at the scene, raised an eyebrow and said, "If it's music, it's out of tune now." The quip drew more laughter, but it subtly underscored that the trio's time was truly over. Meanwhile, at his home, Ethan sat dazed in the living room, staring at his police badge, now just a meaningless trinket. Lucas, in an apartment 3 miles away, couldn't sleep, haunted by the faces of victims he had ignored. Ryan, in a fit of rage, punched the wall, leaving a hole in the drywall. The investigation didn't just expose their crimes. It stripped bare the fragility of the power they had abused. The city of Ellison began to buzz. Local newspapers splashed bold headlines, and the people, for the first time in years, felt a glimmer of hope. Darius Coleman wasn't just investigating. He was rewriting the story of justice. In the days following the internal investigation, Ellison awoke as if from a long, unjust dream. Newspapers piled high on racks, screaming headlines about the crimes of Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell, while citizens gathered outside the Ellison Central Police Department, demanding justice. The investigation sparked by Darius Coleman had laid bare every dark corner, and now, 2 weeks later, the 3 officers were arrested at their homes, cold handcuffs tightening around their wrists. They were brought back to the Fulton County Courthouse, the very place where they had once laughed in triumph, now the arena of their defeat. The courtroom that day was packed. Prosecutor Alicia Torres, 40, stood tall, her voice cutting as she read the charges. "Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, Ryan Caldwell, you are charged with abuse of power, falsifying evidence, illegal searches, and racial discrimination." Ethan, 38, swallowed hard, his eyes avoiding the crowd. Lucas, 35, trembled, his face pale as if drained of life. Ryan, 42, growled, "This is a setup." But Alicia cut him off, presenting irrefutable evidence. Security camera footage, witness testimonies, and ledgers documenting the $10,000 embezzled. Each piece of evidence was a knife, slicing through their veneer of arrogance. Judge Harold Grayson, 60, presided from the bench, his face stern. Gone were the accidental missing tapes or witnesses retracting statements. The jury, led by Olivia Harper, 50, took only 45 minutes to reach a verdict. When Olivia stood and declared guilty, the courtroom erupted in applause. People hugged. Some cried with joy, feeling justice had finally been served. Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan were handcuffed, their eyes now hollow, as they were led out of the courtroom amid jeers from the crowd outside. The lesson from this case echoed through Ellison. Power was not a shield for abuse, and the truth, though hidden, would eventually find the light. Those who had once stayed silent out of fear now held their heads high, knowing the system, though imperfect, could change when someone like Darius dared to stand up. Ethan, Lucas, and Ryan, who once thought themselves invincible, now faced prison, confined within the very walls they had misused to detain the innocent. The Fulton County Courthouse, once a witness to their arrogance, now stood as a symbol of restored justice. As the courtroom doors closed, the people of Ellison knew this story didn't end with a verdict, but marked the beginning of a fairer future. The doors of the Fulton County Courthouse shut behind Ethan Marshall, Lucas Bennett, and Ryan Caldwell, the clink of handcuffs mingling with the cheers of the crowd outside. The guilty verdict was not just the end for the 3 officers who had abused their power, but also the first spark of hope for the city of Ellison. In the weeks that followed, Darius Coleman, 45, didn't stop at punishing the wrongdoers. As police chief, he embarked on a greater mission, rebuilding the Ellison Central Police Department into a symbol of transparency and fairness, a place where the people could place their trust. Darius launched a series of reforms. He established an independent oversight committee, mandated training programs on combating racial bias, and required all officers to wear continuously active body cameras. The department's 2,000-square-foot archive was digitized, ensuring no evidence could disappear again. He regularly met with the community at centers along 9th Street, listening to heartbreaking stories and pledging change. One evening, addressing a crowd of 300, he said, "The police are not the enemy, but the protectors." A mother, who had lost her son to police violence, stood and clapped, tears streaming down her face. That moment rippled through Ellison, igniting belief that justice was more than a dream. The lesson from Darius's journey echoed across the city. Change begins with courage and accountability. He didn't just fix a rotten system. He inspired people to believe that every individual, no matter their position, could make a difference. Young officers, once intimidated by a culture of abuse, now confidently reported misconduct. Residents, from East to West Ellison, began working with police, sharing information they had once kept hidden. A 15-year-old boy stood outside the police department, holding a handwritten sign. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman. We're not scared anymore." Darius, seeing the sign from his office window, smiled, knowing the seeds of justice had begun to sprout. Ellison, once fractured by injustice, slowly began to heal. Newspapers no longer screamed of corruption but reported progress. A successful community policing program, or an officer honor for saving lives in a fire on 12th Street. Darius Coleman, with unwavering vision, didn't just build a better police system. He rekindled faith that justice was the bedrock of a strong community. As the sunset bathed the Ellison Central Police Department in golden light, he stood before the building, gazing at the horizon, knowing this story didn't end with victory but marked the dawn of fairer Ellison, where everyone had a voice and the chance to be protected.